What do you think of when you hear the name Steve Ditko? Steve Ditko is one of the most legendary artists in comic books. He created Spider-Man with Stan Lee. Spider-Man was notable for making the hero a teenager and the lead. The book was a mix of teenage angst and slapstick comedy, which Ditko was really good at. Ditko created Doctor Strange, which was notable for its mind-bending visuals. Ditko worked on the Hulk. He even worked for Marvel before he was called Marvel, doing horror anthology series in Tales to Astonish. The man was a master at his craft. Despite his success, Ditko left Marvel in 1966. The short version of this drama is Ditko left over credit. Each issue of Spider-Man credited Stan Lee as the writer, but Ditko felt he deserved the writer credit too, because he did a lot of the writing for the series. Lee refused, and Ditko eventually left. This is where most people's knowledge on Ditko ends, but Spider-Man wasn't Ditko's final work for Marvel, not at all. About 12 years later, Ditko actually returned to Marvel, and he continued to do work for them for decades. If you're like me, you think of Ditko as firmly 60s artist. Everything I know about him is his early Marvel work, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange. This has proven to be his most important work. Fair, but people rarely mention his return to Marvel. At least never really seen it discussed, so that's what I'm here to do today. I want to go over them one by one and try to figure out why his later work became more obscure. So, Ditko. He never publicly explained his return, at least as far as I can tell, so we gotta rely on Jim Shooter and his blog as a source on this. After I became editor-in-chief of Marvel in 1978, and therefore had the power to offer him work, I told Steve that if he ever wished to work for Marvel, he was welcome, anytime. He was a founding father. I couldn't rectify all the past injustices, though I was trying, but I could help and would keep our door always open to him. Steve apparently wasn't too keen on having anything to do with Marvel early on, but a few years later he came to see me at 387 Park Avenue South offices. I think he realized that we had made a sincere effort to make things better and deal more fairly with creators. Or maybe the fact that Stan wasn't there anymore, having moved out to Coast to work at Marvel Productions, made it a difference. Or maybe he just wanted work. Whatever, he was willing to work for us, and I was happy. Ditko's first work at Marvel was Machine Man in May of 1979. Machine Man was drawn and written and edited by Jack Kirby for 9 issues. Steve Ditko took over as an artist, with Marv Wolfman taking over as the writer in issue 10. I will never get another chance to talk about Machine Man, so please, I beg you, listen to my rambles. Okay, quick summary on Machine Man, the living robot. This is the story of an X-51, a thinking computer in the form of a man. As Aaron Stuck, he tries to find a place in the world that's not quite ready for his kind, but will he find it as a friend, foe, or as the greatest hero of them all? Stan Lee presents. Oof, that had to irritate Ditko. Even now, when Lee's not there, Lee's name still comes before Ditko's. Machine Man is a robot, so his powers is essentially his robot body. He can extend his arms, he can survive this, he doesn't need to breathe, he does whatever a robot can. Let's break it down a little further. I hope all 3 Machine Man fans enjoy this one, because there's probably not going to be a whole lot of Machine Man content coming out. So, Jack Kirby's Machine Man originally is quite an epic book. Unlike something like Fantastic Four, where each issue is a complete story by itself, Machine Man is one continuous story that requires you to read at least 6 issues to get a complete arc. I mean it expects you to read all the issues. His arc is spread out the entire 9-issue run, going from an outsider who struggles with his lack of humanity to someone who comes to learn to help people, and even if they reject him. Most importantly, Kirby's take is not a superhero story itself, but a sci-fi epic that deals with an alien race of machine men coming to invade Earth. There's a singular main villain Machine Man goes against in the first arc. You get these panels of these massive space fleets, and they threaten everyone and everything. Now let's look at what Wolfman and Ditko do to this character. They took the character and made it more of a superhero book. He now has a secret identity and a job and a supporting cast and a love interest. Each issue offers a new story, each issue with usually a new villain every issue. All new, all different. Machine Man is more in line with what you'd expect from Marvel. There's a longer overarching character arcs there, definitely. Mainly there are some villains who run things from the shadows every few issues that get teased. Love interests kind of are there. Most importantly, Machine Man himself has an arc. He starts not really caring for humans, not really being able to integrate with them and debating why humans deserve to be safe, and then slowly learns to see the beauty of humanity. A curious thing about this book is the credits. It credits Ditko for the art, but not the writing. I'm sure Ditko paid a lot of attention to the credits this time around, since he quit over it last time, so I find that very interesting. The book has a lot of usual superhero tropes. It still retains a sci-fi story in there, and there are some odd concepts, like in probably the best issue of the series, there's this group of people who evolve into these higher beings that see the future. They see Machine Man doesn't fit into the world of humans and put him on trial to decide if he should be allowed to interfere with humanity or if he should be destroyed. It's quite philosophical. This is where this book is at its best, and it's more unique there too. There's even a Mysterio Chameleon repeat where some dudes want to ruin Machine Man's reputation by having a fake Machine Man running around creating chaos. Machine Man and robs a bank or something. Some issues in, Tom DeFalco takes over the book. Another Spider-Man writer. Marvel had to be thinking about Spider-Man when they assembled these teams, right? There's no way you hired this many Spider-Man people accidentally. I mean, come on, they even have a dude named Parker working on the book. They probably were hoping to replicate Spider-Man's success, but alas, no. DeFalco brings even more of a superhero flair to the book. Fantastic Four now show up, the villains start wearing costumes, that sci-fi questioning what it means to be human is lessened. It's not gone entirely by any means, but it's hidden behind more of a standard superhero adventures. To be fair, the final issue adds Jack-O-Lantern, who could be straight out of a Spider-Man comic and would go on to become a recurring Spider-Man villain. Jack-O-Lantern issue is a certified banger that gave me a tiny bit of that good old Ditko Spider-Man feelings, and I'd probably rank it as good as the evolved beings singing Kumbaya together. Had Machine Man stayed on this level throughout, I'd say it would be worth checking out. Machine Man is an architect, which I'm gonna take a wild guess and say he's inspired by his politics. Steve Ditko was an objectivist. Ayn Rand's most famous work is Fountainhead, which is about an architect. Machine Man is a loner, cut off from the rest of the world. He does desire human contact, but can never have it. I don't want to psychoanalyze Ditko, but it's an interesting. He wrote a lot of his heroes as loners who struggle with keeping up with people. I wonder how much Steve is in that. Tom DeFalco has described working with Steve Ditko in interviews. I'm looking at his biographical interview from 2019 with comic book historians on YouTube as my source for this. According to DeFalco, when he was assigned to Machine Man, Steve Ditko wasn't sure if he was going to stay on the book. Ditko called DeFalco and immediately asked him, "What gives you the right to write about superheroes?" The two ended up having a 2-hour conversation on the nature of heroes. At the end of the conversation, Ditko said, "This was fun, we should do this again sometime," and hung up. DeFalco also said Ditko wanted the scripts to be short as possible. A paragraph would be ideal according to Ditko. DeFalco said the shortest he ever got was 2.5 pages, which explains the Ditko influence. If that's what he was working off of, Ditko would have had massive influence over the story, and thus all the Ditkoisms become very clear. He was working as what he would have described as artist plus. He does the art and part of the writing as well. I think it's fair to say Machine Man never caught on like Spider-Man or Doctor Strange. Why? I think there are a few reasons for it. One, I think Ditko's art here is weaker than his 60s work. Machine Man came out late 70s and in early 80s. In Spider-Man years, this came around Wolfman and O'Neill's runs on the character. Stern was already in doing Spectacular, Miller and Jansen started their Daredevil, and compared to that, yeah, Ditko is a bit of an antiquated artist by this point. His art lacks details. He's an old artist, and I think you can kind of tell. I respect him, and he's clearly talented, but I think by this point, he was outclassed by the new generation. And two, I think Ditko's storytelling shined on Strange Tales and Spider-Man in two ways. Spider-Man was half comedy, so this rough style fit the book very well. He was a natural in slapstick. When I think of early Spider-Man, I think of Jameson's wild expressions and Peter trying to sew his costume. Then Strange Tales is super inventive with the visuals. Like literally, I'm not even joking. College kids used to buy Doctor Strange comics so they could explore the magical world with Doctor Strange. Machine Man, once again, has no interest in visuals. It's quite dull because it's set in the real world, and Ditko simply is unable to make that work well enough, I feel like. The rest of the issues are straight up in the writing. According to DeFalco, they had a ball writing Machine Man. The dialogue was aggressively meant to be Stan Lee with a lot of adjectives, and DeFalco said it's almost like a parody of Marvel's writing style. As a reader, I did not really pick up on this. It didn't come across as funny or charming, it just kind of came across outdated. Reading back on issue 18, I maybe can see it. Somebody calls Machine Man meddlesome mechanical maniac, which is a lot of M's. This line, "You won't escape me by running behind that electromagnetic generator," is a little silly. I think the book doesn't go far enough to really land on this front. At least to me, it just comes across like a book out of time. But I will admit, going through an issue reading it as self-aware actually improved the book a little bit. Machine Man beats Sasquatch down as one of those "what have I done" moments. So he turns into a living drill and leaves, which first time around came across stupid, but this time came across more funny. I don't know, maybe I read Machine Man with the wrong tone, but even with the correct tone, there's still a problem looming over the book. The supporting cast is very weak. They feel cold and distant. I don't want to get to know them, so Machine Man's desire to do so is not very relatable. Machine Man feels like a larger sci-fi story trapped in a superhero story. The two sides don't melt together well enough. I'm sure there is a good book in here, but what we get quite isn't the right mix, I feel like. During Ditko's time on Machine Man, he also managed to find time to work on a few other books. He worked on an issue of Daredevil, he worked on 2 issues of Hulk, and what I really want to focus on is 4 issues of Marvel's Spotlight, with Captain Marvel and Captain Universe in the leads. Ditko teams up with Archie Goodwin and Bill Mantlo here. Mantlo is one of the longest running Spider-Man writers of all time. Is it Ditko who goes for these people, or are they trying to set them up? If Machine Man took over from Spider-Man, Captain Marvel takes over from Doctor Strange. In this story, a shadow being from another dimension tries to take over reality, and Captain Marvel has to team up with this dude to stop it. You get some wacky visuals, like shadows turning into monsters before attacking, and you get another dimension which feels a little Doctor Strange-esque. This dude is an important character here, and to me, he does bear similarities to Doctor Strange with the square head and the mustache. He has similar hair, his outfit looks similar, but just with a different shade of blue, and there's an extra dimensional battle going on. There's a little bit of a strange vibe to it, well, at least to me. I might be paranoid, but to me it just feels like an evolution of Strange. The Captain Universe story continues weird sci-fi vibes, just this time it's got a horror element to it, bringing back that Tales to Astonish work. Presumably, I haven't read that work from Ditko, honestly. Here, the story follows a teenager visiting his father in a hospital. During this visit, things get strange as the lights go out and the staff tries to get him to leave. There's something off about the staff. They speak robotically and they stare off into the distance, as they have been hypnotized by an alien entity. Hopeless, the teenager cries, and as he does, out of nowhere he gains the Unipower and becomes Captain Universe. The Unipower is a godlike power that is bestowed upon people in peril based on... I don't really know, the comic never explains it. It is a mystery, and I kinda like it that way. Captain Universe gains all the superpowers you can imagine. The powers used in these Ditko issues alone include super strength, turn a board into a magical flying skateboard, flight without the skateboard, mind beam that forces people to tell the truth, shapeshifting, regeneration, wall hacks, you seem to get everything you could ever need. Once the bad guys are dealt with, the Unipower depowers the user and goes off to find a new host for the next month's issue. I think Ditko's horror here is quite effective. The hospital staff is mind controlled and their zombie-like looks is unnerving. Ditko's art style is imperfect. The face can be ugly, which was perfect for teenage Spider-Man because he's awkward, and it's a comedy. And it's also perfect for this, horror. Honestly, out of this batch of comics, the Captain Universe stories might be the new Ditko's best work. The first story combines horror with cosmic weirdness with a teenage protagonist, which Ditko has a knack for. The second Captain Universe story is about 2 sisters teaming up to save one of their husbands from kidnappers, which is notably unusual from Ditko's usual loner heroes. This story has a rare female lead for Ditko. Usually Ditko isn't very good at female characters, honestly, but here, the sisters are actually kinda great. One is more of a woman of action, taking the lead and diving straight into saving her family, even without powers. She just grabs a gun and dives right through the window. Both sisters gain the Unipower this time around. The other sister is not a fighter, so she's much worse at the superheroics. It's an interesting dynamic. The story deals with gangsters, which once again is reminiscent of something you'd find on Ditko Spider-Man. I'm pretty sure I've said it before, Bill Mantlo is Stan Lee era Marvel updated for modern era, at the time modern era, and I think Mantlo is the best fit with old school Marvel of Steve Ditko. Seriously, if you like Ditko Spider-Man, check out Marvel Spotlight, these issues slap. The final Spotlight story follows a cat burglar who's shot and is saved by Unipower. He then uses a Unipower to get back at the people who did it. Ditko's art makes him look possessed. He looks dangerous as he enjoys chasing down these bad guys. He turns into an animal, which makes him look like this absolutely intimidating predator preying on his victims. He ultimately tries to take over the gangs using the Unipower, so the Unipower abandons him, causing him to lose his life. It's a tragic end to a small-time crook corrupted by absolute power. Nobody talks about Ditko's later works, but some of these are genuine old-fashioned bangers. At least Spotlight was really good. Like, let's hope he can keep it up. Ditko did not keep it up. Steve Ditko left Marvel again in 1980 after finishing his work on Marvel Spotlight. Maybe leaving isn't the correct term here. It's more like the work dried up for the next few years between 1981 and 1983. He really only does few works. He works on Fantastic Four Annual 16. He does an issue of The Invisible Iron Man, issue 160. And he does a What If issue 35 about a feudal sorcerer who uses magic to evolve his cats who accidentally create the Black Death, and then the cats go on to found a secret cat society. Also, this is not a what if, it seems to be unironically canon. He did return once again properly in 1984 for a full run. This time he took over Rom, Space Knight, for 16 issues. Rom Space Knight follows Rom, a Space Knight. It's a spin-off of Micronauts led by Mil Mandlo and Sal Buscema. Here's Jim Shooter on Ditko and Rom. When Steve Ditko came around looking for work, I made it a priority to find him something. After all, he was a founding father, and though I couldn't set it right, all the injustices of the past, I could make sure he had work if he wanted it. Rom seemed like a natural. Sal had plenty to do, so no worries there. The reason Rom was right for Steve is that Steve refused to work on flawed heroes. No feet of clay permitted. His philosophy was, and probably still is, that heroes should be noble. Period. I asked him about Spider-Man, some of whose flaws were Steve's ideas. He explained that when he drew Spider-Man, Spider-Man was still a kid, still learning, and therefore allowed to some foibles. Fine then. Rom the Noble Knight it was. Steve did some good work on Rom. That explains Machine Man. Rom was created with Hasbro, so the rights can be problematic. Rom is not on Marvel Unlimited, and I believe the entire series has been collected into Omnis by this point. I'm skipping this one because I don't have $50 to spend, but do know it does exist, and I know people like Rom. I don't know how people feel about Ditko's Rom. Please, if you have thoughts, let us know in the comments. How did Ditko do? During the Rom years, Ditko worked on Avengers Annual 13, and once Rom finishes, he returns to work on Avengers Annual 15. He also returned to Daredevil once again for one or two more issues. Now that I think about it, Ditko likes a certain level of realism in his stories. Like, he likes crime, so Daredevil is actually a really good fit on paper. I can see why he'd be drawn to the character. I wonder if things didn't fall apart with Marvel back in the 60s, if Ditko would have taken over Daredevil at some point. He even returns to Daredevil again later. One thing that we know about Ditko is that he was apparently very picky about his projects. This led to some really weird choices for Ditko. Like, Ditko at some point drew Indiana Jones. Man, Indiana Jones, huh? Like, Indiana Jones is a Ditko approved hero. Like, that's cool. He also did a Chuck Norris comic, like also not available on Marvel Unlimited, which is an unforgivable failure from Marvel's part. How many more generations will be robbed of this masterpiece? Some of these books are probably just done for money, I'd imagine. Ditko didn't get Spider-Man royalties, and I'd imagine a 60s comic book artist would have had bills piling up by this point. Some of these books, though, I think reflect Ditko as a person. Machine Man was his choice. His repeated revisits to Iron Man, Hulk, and Daredevil signal to me that these characters struck a chord on some level. Ditko also worked on Jim Shooter's new universe, but I'm not sure if that counts as Marvel work, so I'm not covering it, but I'll mention it. Now we can get back to something bigger for Steve, maybe even his most notable later work. Ditko finished his last Avengers assignment in 1986, and then you go to 1988. This might be his busiest year so far. He starts in February with What If special, issue number 1, covering the story What If Iron Man Was a Traitor. And then he follows that up. Ditko released a backup on Amazing Spider-Man Annual 22. Spider-Man doesn't appear in the Ditko story, but it's still a Spider-Man book, and it's, I believe, the very first appearance of Mass Marvel. I'm not calling him that. Ditko's new creation. Speedball appears on Spider-Man's story as well as he even meets Spider-Man. Some months later, in June, Ditko did an issue of Marvel Age Annual, which is some sort of guidebook for Marvel Universe. It gives you synopsis for the characters and the teams. Not very interesting for a modern reader who has the power of the internet at their fingertips, but this issue does include a Ditko short story about Speedball. These couple of appearances then spin off into a full run on Speedball's own title. This time Ditko got credit for co-plotting with Roger Stern on the script. Just for perspective to all my homies watching this video on release, I appreciate you. Speedball released after Craven's Rage Quit. Ditko was working on Marvel book during Michelini's run. He started Speedball after Venom made his first appearance. If I'm reading this right on the Spider-Man timeline, Ditko left a little before McFarlane finished his run. This video should release right in the correct spot going by late stage Ditko. I never realized that, like McFarlane and Michelini are an entirely separate era in my mind, and yet here's Ditko working with Roger Stern around the same time. Ditko is a 60s guy in my mind, but the man did work a lot of work afterwards, and even before that, Ditko worked for Marvel before it was called Marvel. For me, Sometimes I lose that perspective. His greatest work becomes everything so easily. So, Steve Ditko's grand finale, Marvel Edition. What even is Speedball? Speedball follows a teenager, Rob Baldwin, who gains superpowers. He's an outcast, bullied, he has no luck with girls. Yeah, I'm just gonna come out and say it. Speedball feels like Spider-Man. Speedball's kind of a 60s throwback in writing and in art. There's few differences between Speedball and Spider-Man. Rob is not the wisecracker Peter Parker was, nor is he as smart. Rob's quiet, most of his dialogue is in thought bubbles. He's not as angry as Peter, frustrated but never bitter. Rob Baldwin's parents are still alive and they play an important role in this comic. His dad is the assistant district attorney. He preaches about the importance of law and the practical world. The mother is an actress who preaches about the importance of the spiritual. This is Rob's coming of age story, so he spends a lot of time wondering how to balance these two worlds. I could imagine this conflict might be coming from somewhere personal, but again, I don't know, I'm just speculating. Spider-Man was half comedy. This book is maybe mildly funny at times, but for most part, it's a pretty serious take. This little child kills some of his villains. It's a little grim on him, to be honest. He's still using that old school box paneling. Ditko's paneling is fine, but it's a little dull by this point, a bit boring by then. I think it's holding back the storytelling. Also, Ditko draws an odd looking cat. Speedball's powers are strange. His body can transform into a superhero 4, where he can now create balls of energy which allow him to bounce around like a speedball, ricocheting off of surfaces. It sounds really stupid, but I promise it's actually kind of a fun premise. His powers activate by hitting something really fast, so in order to suit up he has to run into a tree or something. And maybe even, dare I say it, cool. I really like Speedball, honestly, far more than I ever expected to. But there is one thing about Speedball that is very important to note that I think might have damaged the book overall. For whatever reason, Ditko and Stern decided to make the issues include 2 stories. So most stories here are half the size of a regular story. It's not a flaw per se, and it can be charming, but I can see why that would turn off people, especially at the time who are paying money specifically for this issue. It could come across unsatisfying compared to the epic storylines found in other books. It's reminiscent to Strange Tales in length, and Ditko has done a lot of backup shorts, so I wonder if he had a particular love for this shorter format, because it is such a specific choice. Due to its compact nature, there isn't much time to focus on the supporting cast. Every single Ditko book fails at this, honestly, except for like Spider-Man. The supporting cast, low-key also kind of got better after Ditko left, so like, I don't know, like, it's like now that looking back on it, it's like, maybe he's not very good at actually writing supporting casts. I will note that the high school kids, they are very forgettable here. Flash 2, Liz 2, and something I really noticed, and it became really apparent with Speedball, Ditko writes the same cast the entire time. There was a Flash 2 and Gwen 2 in Machine Man as well. And Flash and Liz left to Spider-Man, he replaced them with Gwen and Harry. He really does these really mean antagonistic supporting characters, and I don't know what's up with that, but it happens consistently in these books. I don't know if he's pulling from his own life, but it is very notable. If you've read early Spider-Man, you know what this cast is like, because it is that same thing, exact thing. They talk and act the same. But the parents do rock. They have an interesting relationship where they argue a lot, and they have a very different viewpoints on life. The dad's very practical and argues for the rule of law, while the mom likes freedom and self-expression and embraces new ideas. They still love each other and support each other, and man, Ditko and Stern really nailed the relationship between the parents. I don't know why these two specifically are so good, but they make a great couple. And there's one thing about Speedball that has to be brought up. I don't like talking about it, but with Speedball, it's kind of inescapable, and that's politics. Steve Ditko was an objectivist, and it really shows here. There's this one issue where the villains are protesters who vandalize public spaces. There's literally a villain group called the Proletariat. I don't know how to say that correctly in English. The Proletariat, who announce themselves as poor and the oppressed. Somebody literally yells out, "You left-wing weasels." Steve Ditko saw the Red Scare and lived in the shadow of world wars. He lived through all of Cold War, so him being conscious makes sense. It's not very fun to read, it kind of takes you out of it because it's too real world and it's not good enough to hold any real merit. And I think in age we find the ultimate death blow. Ditko and Stern were getting pretty old by this point. Ditko was born in 1920s and Stern in 1950. The Speedball is a coming-of-age story, and yes, old people can write great young characters, but old people cannot represent the new generation. Not truly. Young people will always want their own identity. They need their own voice, and I would argue of over 40-year-old men can never do that and should never be that. I can't speak for late 80s kids, but I feel like Speedball, a throwback to 60s, could never be a book for the new generation. It's at its core a book for old people, and with that it becomes a book with a very niche audience, and I think that truly is why it ultimately died off after 10 issues. Because it's genuinely a good book, but it's ultimately very specific. It's for an audience who want a 60s throwback. Remember when Spider-Man fought aliens? Yeah, Ditko revisits that idea here, but instead of Martians, they're humanoid cats. And Mask Marvel defeats them by throwing catnip at them. Okay, maybe Speedball is a bit of a funny book. There is also a giant chicken. What is it about Ditko and cats? Like, there was also a what if about the cat people, and there's running gaggins people about Rob's cat running away, and the stories either begin or end with him chasing it. I don't know, I guess Ditko was a cat guy. After Speedball, Ditko kept working for Marvel, but all his future works are one-offs or backup stories. He will never lead a book like he did with Machine Man and Speedball. Speedball was Ditko's last ongoing Marvel series. I started this video wanting to cover Machine Man, and then my interest naturally grew either into his 80s works, and now it feels odd if I don't talk about 90s Ditko. Here's the funny thing about 90s Ditko. Almost none of this stuff is on Marvel Unlimited. I started doing this video on my own, reading Ditko stuff on Unlimited and reading Shooter's blog, but eventually I came across these CBR articles by Brian Cronin that covers much of the same topics. I highly recommend reading these articles. They are excellent takes on Ditko, and especially the 90s one collects insight on Ditko by Jim Shooter, so I recommend them. I don't want to cross over any more than I need to, so I'm skipping the unmarble parts, but the further I got into the video, the more reliant on them I became because I cannot read some of this stuff on myself, so I just kind of have to go off of someone else's word. Ditko was assigned to Marvel Comics Presents, and this seems to be his most prominent work from this era. He was working on these issues during the Speedball years, but Marvel never added the Ditko parts to Marvel Unlimited. Fun fact, these issues are the first time Marvel released Weapon X story. I don't know, I just think that's neat. I can't say much about these issues because they're not there, and some of these are straight up missing synopsis from fandom.com, so they really are a little obscure. He also did backup stories for Spider-Man annuals, which is weird. He refused to do Spider-Man as a character, but his stories kept releasing in Spider-Man of all places? Is that Ditko decision or a Marvel one? Were they trying to advertise Ditko returning to Spider-Man or something? What's going on here? In Marvel Superheroes issue 8, Ditko designed Squirrel Girl, which I believe is the last notable Ditko creation. This genuinely might have been it. Here's a fun little story for you that I dug up. During the 90s, Stan Lee was gonna write Ravage 2099 with John Byrne on the pencils, but Byrne dropped out, after which Steve Ditko was asked to meet with Stan Lee to discuss working together once again. Ditko agreed, and there was a brief reunion with Stan Lee during the early 90s. They didn't end up working together in the end, but because Ditko disagreed with the philosophical foundation, but still, Ditko and Lee did meet up and, at least for a moment, had allegedly a positive interaction. That's nice. That's a cute little story. Ditko needed more work, and he left for other opportunities. Ditko returned to Marvel for one final time in 1995. He worked on a Phantom miniseries. He did Power Rangers as well. Power Rangers are Ditko-approved heroes, I guess. Then there's his final issues released in 1997, literally on December. An issue of Shadows and Light starring Iron Man with writer Len Wein. None of these are on Marvel Limited. After this, Ditko would never return to Marvel ever again. He did one more story for DC and then retired from mainstream comics for good. Ultimately, none of Ditko's later works really stuck around like his prime works like Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. I guess Squirrel Girl was his greatest success since those days, since she appears in adaptations in a video games popping off, so I don't know. Good for him. If I had to break it down, I think it comes down to a few things. One, I think the writing is simply worse. Machine Man's supporting cast is boring. It lacks the hard Aunt May brings and the funnier moments of Flash and Jameson. The villains just don't hit the same, except for maybe a few standouts. I can't really recall any of the villains, honestly, now that I think about it. I can't even name the supporting cast members. Machine Man is unrelatable as a character and kind of boring. And I think ultimately, Ditko as an artist became outdated. The trends at the time leading into more detailed art like McFarlane, and the storytelling of comics at least tried to be more mature. Ditko did what he always did, what he had done in the 60s, and it is charming. I like it, but time catches up to everyone. And I think for the people at the time, Bagley, Larson, McFarlane, that type of artists were more modern and thus more appealing. I think this datedness is at display in the art and also in the writing. This video was meant to cover Machine Man, and then I expanded to Spotlight, and then I expanded to Speedball, and then I ended up reading a bunch of stuff on Steve Ditko, and I in the end made a sheet collecting later Ditko works in order by publication dates. It's probably not fully accurate since I scrambled together kind of after the fact, later parts, after I got confused which what if goes where, so here you go. It includes some stuff I didn't mention before, but can you blame me for not knowing what The Destroyer issue 4 is? Anyway, that's all from me. I hope you have a great day, and I hope I see you on the next one.